like to call to order the school board meeting, September 16th. We'd like to stand and pledge allegiance, please. Okay, first up, recognition schedule for 2019-20 school year. Regina?
Our recognition will start in October. So our first meeting in October, or our second meeting in October, we will have some students joining us. The student council reports will also begin in October as students are getting back into the swing of the school.
Awesome. We'd like to hear from our student rep, Mr. Nemeth.
Hi, everyone. This week was another busy week at the high school. I have some stuff to report, but not as much as last week. We're currently in the process of integrating a Canvas page for student council. We're working with the whole student officer team to find the best ideas and work together to make this Canvas page that will be accessible from all students, or to all students with the iPads that now everyone has, to post surveys and maybe even get the voting for student council elections on this platform. We're still hashing out some other ideas, and so I'll report back on that. In terms of school news, we had 16 National Merit semifinalists. So that's a pretty good amount. This weekend, the 40th 40-year school reunion for, I guess, the class of 1976 is going to be back at the high school. The Wall of Fame committee met this past afternoon to make recommendations and nominate people for the Wall of Fame this year, and that will be coming out at homecoming. And lastly, just clubs and everyone is starting to get in the homecoming mood, making baskets and getting prepared for the celebration. So yeah, as the school year gets moving, it seems like everyone's still happy, and we're all working hard. So that's all I have.
Really quick question. Last meeting you talked about an Instagram account. Can you give the name of that publicly again, please?
Yeah, so our tag is at GV School Board Student Reps. We underwent a couple of name changes just to get it right, and it's kind of long now. Did you get that? Okay, all right. So yeah, if you heard that, you should definitely follow us because we're looking for some more followers. All right.
Thank you very much. The board met in executive session earlier to discuss personnel matters. We do have Mr. Frey is absent tonight. He has injured himself, but he will be back for our next meeting. Mr. Barrett and Mrs. Armstrong are attending this evening by telephone. And we'll have the secretary's correspondence.
And we have none this evening.
Thank you. Mary, do we have a legislative report?
It is rather lengthy, but I'm going to really try and pare it down as much as possible. The school, the governor did sign the budget at the end of June, which is always a good thing. Some of the highlights were that basic education funding was increased by $160 million. It was requested $200 million, but signed off at $160. Special education funding got its full request of $50 million increase. Career and technical education got a $7 million increase based on a $10 million request. CTE equipment grants got $3 million. They didn't request anything, but the delta from the 10 million they requested, the 7 million implementation, and 3 million was given towards equipment. Ready to Learn block grant was funded at 268 million. Pre-K counts, $40 million was requested. It was funded at 25 million. Early intervention was increased by 15 million as requested. EITC was increased by 25 million. And the PCCD safety grant remains at $60 million increase. The governor had proposed 45 million. A few other things is that compulsory school age, the age of the beginners changed from age 8 to age 6. Dropout ages changed from 17 to 18. And these are part of Act 14. These are summary for Act 14 of 2019, which is a school code bill. The food shaming allows districts to provide an alternate meal to students that are not free or reduced price lunch eligible if they owe more than $50 for school meals. EITC, which is your economic improvement tax credit, educational improvement tax credit, I'm sorry, adds a definition of economically disadvantaged school to the EITC law, which increases the tax credits available under the OSTC program by 25 million. And basically that's it. It was just kind of some shifting of the numbers, not too much change. There are a couple things that are still on the docket for this coming year, but all in all, things look pretty good.
Any questions of Mary?
Just out of curiosity, not that it's anything for us, I don't think, what does that mean by school dropout rate change? School dropout age change from 17 to 18? What does that mean?
From 17 to 18, that you're allowed to drop out only at age 18. If you drop out at age 17, you're not in compliance with what
Oh, okay, I
is
know previously you
required.
could drop out at
Correct.
17. I mean, I know we don't
Correct.
have that as an issue really
Yes,
around
we
here,
don't
but
have
thank
that,
you.
so
It's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was a lot of good stuff. Okay, do we have any other board reports?
Yep.
Go ahead.
So the Instructional Technology Committee is now officially changing our name to the Instructional Technology and Curriculum Subcommittee, just so we kind of cover our full charge of what we do. So the committee met on Monday, September 9th. We were joined by Great Valley administrators, Dr. Stephen O'Toole, Dr. Tricia Beck, Dr. Speaker Pawlowski, and Mr. Peterson. Dr. O'Toole began the meeting with the historical perspective of the district's curriculum development. When he shared the current practice of using, he then shared the current practice of using the Understanding by Design framework for all district curriculum. With the Understanding by Design, curriculum is planned in a 3-stage process. First, identify and desire results. Second, determine assessment evidence. And 3, plan learning experiences with instruction. This process helps to avoid treating the textbook as the curriculum and keeps the learning targets at the forefront of the designing curriculum. Next, Dr. Beck shared an overview of the K through 12 curriculum process, including the information about the integration of the content and process standards, eligible content within the PSSAs and keystones, and enduring understandings and knowledge and skills for units. She also shared information about horizontal and vertical alignment and the importance of ensuring consistency between classes and between grade levels. Then Dr. O'Toole shared the 2019 to 2026 curriculum timeline that was developed by the Teaching and Learning Department. That timeline identifies when the specific curriculum areas will begin researching, revising, and implementing new curriculum. The timeline will assist the Teaching and Learning Department as they budget for new materials and plan professional development. Dr. O'Toole also shared that teachers and administrators will also begin work on reviewing the district's assessment and grading practices this year, according to a 3-year timeline outlined in the district's comprehensive plan. The goal by the end of year 3, is to determine the need for a new grading and reporting system for the district. Following the conversation about curriculum, Dr. Beck, Dr. O'Toole, and Dr. Spika-Polubinski shared a brief overview and update about kindergarten. Dr. O'Toole shared that a thorough board presentation about the implementation of the full-day program is planned for January. Our next meeting is November 11th from 5 to 6. Thanks.
Does anyone have any questions for Brian?
Yeah, Brian, thank you. That was really interesting to hear. I was curious about a meeting that we discussed, I think, at our probably June board meeting. I think in May, there was a meeting of your committee that I actually attended as a bystander, where you talked a lot about foreign language programs. And there was really some interesting observations of what we do today, a little bit of information about some other districts, a little bit of discussion about, you know, why some districts might have language in 7th grade and what that would mean for us, or different language in a different way in 7th grade. We do have language, but where they have a full year. I'm curious, either from you or from the superintendent, as to what the next steps to explore that further. I mean, we do great things today, but it sounds like there's just other things out there happening in other areas, and
Yeah.
just want to make sure we're at the forefront.
So we're not charged with doing anything next step, so if the board wants us to look into it further, we can. Dr. Spika-Polubinski, do you have anything else?
I guess I have a question. What is the expectation? Because I'm not 100% certain what the next step would be.
Well, the next step would be if the board took some information from our meeting and they had interest in doing something more within it, something from the board would come up.
This is Dave. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dave, we have you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, though, also, Brian's right. If there's more interest from the board, majority of the board, to move forward with something, then that's definitely an option. But I think also if the committee, along with the administration in that committee meeting, had thought there was some interest to do something to move forward, that the committee could be charged to come forward with a recommendation to the board if it felt necessary. We didn't get to that point, and it's not to say we couldn't, but the committee could come back to the board and recommend a further, evaluation, or, or to even go to a full-out recommendation. That's up to the committee, is the way I view it.
As a board member, I would love to hear the superintendent's perspective on this. Thanks.
Absolutely. At the committee meeting, one of the questions or the request to look a little deeper was to look at what we currently do at the middle school, and it was exploring especially what happens in 7th grade. So we had the presentation from the middle school and the high school looking at the exploratory or the 7th grade working through multiple languages rather than starting the selection of a single language. So that was certainly the information that was presented, and then the comparison, as was mentioned by Ms. Swan, that looking at what other schools do and what offerings are in other schools. I certainly think that could be something that if the committee would like to look more thoroughly, there are a lot of ways we can go with that, and I would just feel much more comfortable if we took time to plan and find out best practices that exist, and then looking at possible models that exist, rather than making a recommendation to go in a specific direction without having done that homework. So that's certainly something that, moving forward, if the committee would so choose, that we can explore. And we're talking, I believe, about multiple different models. We started talking about what's happening at the middle school. That was what was done at the committee level. And at that point, Dr. O'Toole had not only had the middle school presentation, the middle school staff there with administration, high school also joined to show the matriculation through from 7th grade through 12th grade. If we would want to expand that conversation, we would also expand the players that would be involved in that conversation to do it justice.
If someone who did not attend that meeting wanted to go back and get information from that meeting, I don't believe it was taped or videoed because it was a committee. Is there any way that that information can be shared publicly, or is it already?
I think there's some more from some documents from that meeting we could share.
So then, Dave, is it appropriate to say that this now goes back to committee at the committee meeting level, and then they come to the board to make recommendations or to clarify a direction, or is that something we are to discuss now?
I'm a believer that that's why we form committees, and you should let the committee do that. As I think Regina laid out very well, is I think the discussion needs to be with the committee and the administration on what potential options exist for looking forward, and then whether or not the committee wants to recommend that we proceed with any of those different options. Like you said, what's the best practice? We decide that's what we want to do. But I think it should go back to the committee to let the committee make that decision rather than, otherwise we might as well eliminate the committee and just do everything as a board, as a whole.
Okay, so then will we be able to have that put on your November agenda, Brian?
Sure.
Thank you.
I just want to add, I think it was a really rich discussion that you had back in May, and I look forward to the next steps in the discussion. I think the team from the schools, the administration, and the committee that was there really asked good questions. There was a lot of great information, so I'm sure that you're on the right track, or you have a good foundation at least to be able to go further and look at specific recommendations. So thanks for that.
And having not been at that instructional technology and curriculum meeting, I would love to view any sort of documentation or summary that might exist. That might be a great level setter for those of us that weren't there.
So anything you might have, Brian, that you might be able to share with the colleagues would be a wonderful thing. This way, then, we're all up to snuff. You guys go to committee, do what you need to do in committee, but at least we're all up to snuff. Great work on that committee, let me say. Thank you.
Well, I just want to make sure everybody keeps in mind, though, the purpose of the committee is to do all that work. It's not to then pass all the information on to the board as a whole. If people are interested in that information, that's why we have a public committee meeting, right, for that purpose. Otherwise, again, we're going to be rehashing everything a committee does, is my concern.
And Dave, I did go to that meeting. It's just a while ago.
Yeah, I understand.
And for those who are interested,
But I'm sure
the meeting was held April 8th in last spring, so we would be able to upload the notes as well so that you would have that information.
Yeah. But don't get me wrong, I mean, I think we understand, and Brian understands, it sounded like what we can do at the next meeting, and he'll guide us down the path of coming up with some good answers.
And can I just get some clarification? Does this mean that the committee is going to be looking at languages across the district or just at the middle school level or high school level? I just want to be clear that we're on the same page.
I think you got to let the committee investigate that with the administration,
Yeah.
and then come back with ideas.
I believe,
I think at the end of the day, Steph, the answer will be across, the whole gamut. But I think you got to let the committee and the administration go down that process.
I believe what I heard, for clarification, what I heard the request was to look at world language K through 12, not only isolating. I believe that's what I had heard, so we can certainly start that conversation at committee.
Well,
Thank you.
I think as you said, though, what's best practice, right? And if K through 12 is best practice, that's great. If 11 and 12 is best practice, that's okay too, right? It's looking at what we can think is the best answer for Great Valley, whatever that might be.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That was very useful. I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent right now. We'll go into the architect feasibility study update.
Yes, as the process continues, we started this process, if you remember, last school year when the board had an opportunity to interview multiple architects, and the decision was made to work with the Schrader Group. And since that time, I have to say a very large thank you to David Schrader and his team, who have really taken time from the time that vote was made until today in getting information to all of us and sharing information and really taking time to do a deep dive into our facilities. A large thank you to Jim Abraham and Ken Morris, who have been the tour guides in making sure that every crevice of our district has been looked at and analyzed, and a lot of great work was done. So tonight, the idea is David Schrader from Schrader Group will be presenting to us the high-level look at the information that they've collected at this point. If you remember last week, we had talked about the plan moving forward. We are going to have a open meeting of feasibility. Our facilities committee meeting will be at 6 o'clock on October 15th, from 6 to 6:30. Following that meeting in the high school auditorium will be a much larger deep dive where David and his team will be presenting much more information from 6:30 to 7:30. The process will then move into November 12th, a work group meeting, again following the facilities committee meeting, to allow community members and staff members to get involved. And December 9th, another work group meeting with the outcome goal that a list of options would be presented to the board in January. So this is the first of multiple information sharing and / work group meetings.
I'm sure we'll get there at some point, but I think you and your team did a fantastic job of publicizing all the work and input we were trying to get with the full-day kindergarten decision that this board made. I'd love to hear what our plan is to communicate with and engage the community on this topic as well.
Absolutely, similar to the communication plan that was utilized with full-day kindergarten and other large initiatives. Mrs. Blake is working very closely with the Schrader Group and drafting those communications, so we have a communication plan built out in the same exact way. The real strength of this process is engaging community members, staff members, board members, parents in these discussions. And that was the strength of full-day kindergarten, having people come out and really have an opportunity to share. We will be using those same kind of methodologies to access that information as well. So without further ado, David, thank you.
Thank you. And so thank you very much for having us tonight, and thank you again to everybody, actually many of the folks out here who've helped through the last 3 months in this process. So what I'm going to try to lay out tonight in 15 minutes, which is my time limit, is basically the building blocks. And what we promised we would do starting last spring was to develop 3 major pieces of this, and this would form the foundation for the options discussion that would come in the fall. So I gave this a test drive. I think I can still drive it, and it looks like it's going the right way. There are 3 basic building blocks that we've built into this process. One is the facility assessment of the facilities within the district. Mr. Bechtel, who's sitting in the group here, is one of our lead architects, my partner actually, who led all the architects and engineers through with your facilities folks, building by building, space by space, to understand all of the systems in the buildings. So he's got a pile of paper that will eventually turn into a report for you. You have the shortened version at your desk today. And for the board members on the phone, we just passed out this document. There's a copy waiting for you when you get back. It's meant to be a very simple version of the facility assessment, so you'll get a look at that. And that'll be the focus of what we really look at in the October presentation that Dr. Speaker Palabinski was just talking about. The second part of this were the enrollment projections, and you engaged, the district engaged a firm called Decision Insight to do these enrollment projections. Those projections, we were originally, and what would have made sense originally was to have had them available during the summer so that we could build all of our capacity analysis from that. You made some big changes this past year. You did full-day kindergarten, and you've got a number of other things going on in the district that are changing how the enrollment projections will look. Because obviously, as you bring this full-day kindergarten to the district, you have already seen increases in the number of kindergarten students who end up in the district. So what we decided to do with the administration was to hold off on the enrollment projections until this fall so you could get some good data behind that to start to do all the planning from. So that's part 2. So part 3 was Danielle Hoffer, who is not able to be with us tonight, and I have met with your administration and your building administration, both within their buildings and then separately in a series of meetings, to try to determine what the full building capacities are of all these buildings. And it may be as simple to you as 10 classrooms times 25 kids equals 250 students. That's not the case, and I'm going to explain that here as we go. Every district has their own way of using buildings, and we've tried to capture within each district that we work with what your capacities are. So that's the goal of tonight, and I'm going to use one building as an example, and I'm going to show you the outcomes from the rest. You do have all of the buildings in here in their very simple format, and hopefully you can take a look at this between now and October and build that list of questions that I know will come up. So as we said, we kind of kicked off in March, and in April we spent the time doing the building surveys. Bruce worked with the team over spring break, and May through August we've been doing all the assessment and capacity analysis, and now here we are, as we promised, beginning to lay out the process for you. October, November, December will be your planning workshops. So I'm going to lay out the facility assessment portion very quickly for you. When we look at your existing buildings, our job is to figure out how all of the building infrastructures are supporting those buildings currently. And we like to look at it as if, what would it take to get the building back to its original working form? Now, this is a district that has kept their buildings in beautiful shape. You have done renovations, additions, and new buildings between 10 and 20 years ago. So it would seem to you that there'd be nothing to do in the buildings, or maybe not. And if you really look at it, though, infrastructure in buildings is really intended to last for 15 to 25 years. That's essentially the lifespan of a lot of the equipment in the buildings. So if these buildings are already 15 to 20 years old, you're starting to see some of the infrastructure start to go the other direction. And you can never tell that by how well these buildings are kept up, because good finishes, nice finishes, comfortable environments make you think everything is continuing to function the way you hope it would. So the goal is to lay out in a 5 to 15 year span how much you might have to expend on these buildings to replace a number of those infrastructures that you look at. And again, remember, you did this a number of years ago up until a certain point, and now you're in the process of looking at these facilities again. So we use Charlestown as an example. Just as an example, these are the very simplistic reviews of what you would be doing in 5 to 15 years on these buildings. For instance, Charlestown, there's some minor site upgrades to be done just to keep everything in good working order. As you all know, electrical and lighting, people are replacing LED or regular fixtures with LED everywhere because it's so energy efficient. So that's something you would be doing in the next number of years. There's also a need to upgrade some of the power to the building, the generator to the building, and so on. So those will be things that you see in a 5 to 15 year span. Minor work on the building exterior, although there's a little bit. So the original building was obviously quite old, so you have to continue to maintain and keep that up. And to keep it simple for the heating, ventilating, air conditioning, you did do a replacement in 2003. However, you did what's called a 2-pipe system, and the goal would be to go to a 4-pipe system at some point so you can heat and cool at the same time. So you all know that there are these swing seasons where your house needs to be heated one day, cooled the next day. Well, you need to do the same with a building that has north and south exposure. You have to be able to cool one side and heat the other side to be really consistent inside the building. So that's something that starts to happen, and of course, because that building was renovated X number of years ago, there will also be a need to replace the unit ventilators in the building at some point in the future too. So those are all things that you have to look at as future expenditures in each of the buildings, and it's probably a pretty good capture of what most of the buildings will require at some point. Same things with your technology and things like that. Now, these are always shocking, because they are beautiful buildings in great shape. each building is going to have a number for construction that over that time frame is going to see anywhere between $8 and probably $15 million per building. And it's going to be gauged upon the size of the structure. Now remember, most of that cost often comes out of purely infrastructure. It's lighting, it's power, and it's HVAC. Those are the things that you replace over that time, plus roofs and sometimes windows, depending on how far the windows have been exposed over time. We generally, because we don't ever want to leave a district in a position where they don't have enough money in a project, we also advocate for soft costs, and the soft costs in all of these projects are fees, permitting, oftentimes furniture in the new spaces, oftentimes technology that goes along with that, and you always include some contingency to make sure you've got enough in the project. So at a very early stage, when you're just doing budgeting and estimating like this, we build typically about 30% into a project, and I think you would see that as kind of an industry average for that. So you'll see numbers like this, and you'll say, well, Charlestown does not need $10 million worth of work. It's correct, it does not. Over 5 to 15 years from now, though, it will. And so that's how this whole thing is predicated. It's about what would you need to budget to make sure that these buildings, the HVAC, the power, the roofs, and so on, continue to be at the level that they currently are. So that's kind of a quick synopsis of one building. It gets a little scary when you multiply that over all the buildings. Any questions real quickly on that as a topic?
I do have a question. So if you're looking at this 5 to 15 years, are we saying right now they need nothing? Like, does Charlestown need nothing now?
No, so how we did this so that your district can use this appropriately is we actually ranked the quality of things and when they would need to be replaced. So you'll actually have a whole capital plan in place to start to tell you when to implement some of these changes over time. So no, these buildings, some of them do need some work now. You just redid all of the masonry at the middle school in the front. So that's an example of the kind of work that you would typically see you'd have to do.
So one of your 2 slides back, you had shown ADA upgrades. So isn't ADA, we keep up on ADA all the time. So when you say ADA upgrades, are you talking about, in Charlestown, for instance, the elevator needing to be replaced, or what are you talking about that wouldn't be included in the other construction?
No, excellent point. They could be, so on a site, the kinds of things that you see are curb cuts, the actual angle of the slope of a sidewalk to make sure that that sidewalk actually meets the needs versus having to put a railing next to that to accommodate today's ADA. The strange thing about the ADA upgrades is when the buildings were done, they were done to meet the ADA requirements of that time. And over time, those have changed slightly so that you have to keep up with those as time goes on as well. So there are small things like that in each building. And I could go back and look right now and tell you what the building ADA upgrades were. They were probably door hardware and things like that. That's my guess is what they were. Do you remember offhand?
Some door hardware and probably some dimensional clearance issues, minor accessories, the toilet rooms.
So they're called out line by line in this document, so you can actually pick them out.
So ADA, though, we don't have 5 to 15 years to do. If we know that it's an ADA issue, those things have to be done, even though they may be small in size. That's the fast track list. That all has to be done up front. Am I right?
You are, that's very correct. As a district, you would want to keep up with your ADA requirements. That said, you're not actually required to do full ADA upgrades until you do a full renovation of a building. So there are incremental amounts of ADA work that you have to do based on how much construction you're doing within the project.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So that just gives you a sense of, oh, I'm sorry.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
That's all right. So, I mean, this list, I'm sure, is very thorough and complete. But as I've noticed over the years with a lot of these projects, there's nice to haves and needs to haves, right? So is that going to be factored in? I mean, like, you described like the 4-pipe system versus the 2-pipe system, right? Is it ideal to have a 4-pipe system? Sure. the building has existed for how many years on a two-pipe system and been fine, right? And then obviously, you know, a new roof, right? A roof is scheduled to last for whatever, 15 to 20 years. Is there going to be, you know, a window that says, you know, this roof could go 15 to 25 years, or, you know, because obviously what you're describing, and I can't see the numbers, but I got to believe that what you're describing is like a big chunk of money over the next 15 years for all the buildings. And so how do we optimize that? Because I have a funny feeling that it's more than we can afford at the end, is my guess, if you try to do it all at once or all over the timeline you said. So is that going to be part of the report too?
We can certainly
Because
meet,
we do a lot of things over the years. I mean, over the years, we've pushed off different projects because they weren't needed. So we're just trying to, you know, get an understanding of what definitely is going to need to be done versus what's a nice to have.
right. So that's an excellent point. So an example, I have a slide up just for information that has heating, ventilating, air conditioning again. And in the end, what will start to happen is the unit ventilators, you'll start to see some failure in the unit ventilators. And as those start to fail, that'll likely be when you decide that you're going to do the unit ventilator replacement, because you're not going to replace two, you're going to replace the whole system likely at some point. The other part of this is condensing units. That building uses condensing units for cooling, and those will begin to fail. And when those fail, you'll just replace those as a whole. So that would be the need to do. And then at that same time, the question would be, do I also convert to a 4-pipe system or not? So that would be the desire to control better and to have, and to have more efficient heating and cooling cost-wise.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yep.
I understand that, and that's great. That as long as those are pointed out, because obviously it's the cost benefit, right? I mean, if it's a 25-year return on that investment for the heating and cooling savings, right, for the nice to have, then it may not make sense to do. If it's a 5 to 10 year investment on putting those pipes in, then obviously it becomes a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we do it? Because we're going to save money over the long haul, right? So.
Yep. You're exactly right.
Thank you.
Yeah, to Mr. Barrett's point, this is the slide that's always the shocker. So you share something, so if you've done the math in your head very quickly on the telephone, you heard me say $7 million worth of construction, multiply that by X number of buildings. In this case, the list of work that you could do on the buildings over that time to maintain the infrastructure at the level it was when you built it is in the neighborhood of $75 million worth of work. So you need to have this information as a baseline to understand that just to keep the buildings where they are over that period of time, you will likely expend something like that on the systems. And the important part of this is that as you look at a Charlestown Elementary, for example, if you make some decisions as we go forth here about different options, and you suggest that perhaps we'll add to Charlestown, well then this gets folded into that addition project, and you likely would renovate and pick all these systems up at the same time. So this is all meant to be baseline information for you to know what the buildings may cost to keep up, and then to know what you would put into it if you decided that you wanted to do an addition. By the way, I didn't suggest doing an addition to that building, but.
So then, basically, these costs would not get added in 100% to the cost to retrofit the buildings for our student population today and in the future. There comes a point where you take some from the renovation because you're doing some new construction, right? So I just want to make sure nobody passes out here at the table tonight.
Yeah.
But am I correct there?
You are. These are always shocking numbers. Every single time we present this, every district reacts the same. They can't believe that they have that much work that they might do in their district. And it's true, you could, if you did something like you suggested, let's say we added to Charlestown Elementary, we would likely put chillers, condensers, boilers, and so on into that would be picked up partially as the new construction value, so you'd never see the entire $8 million. So that's a good example of what you may do there. So yes.
Just for clarification again, you said this is over 10 to 15 years. So we're spending money on our buildings every year anyway.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, you
we
have
have
a-
to add it up and look, but this is probably more than that, but it's still, it's 10 to, I mean,
It's
just
more
thinking
than that, but
for all of
it's-
us looking,
yeah.
divide that by 15 years, it's
So
still a
keep-
lot, but not as scary.
Keep in mind, that, and that's the way I look at it too, you do have to keep in mind that you are spending X dollars so far because the buildings are relatively new for the moment. And some of those systems are going to reach the end of their usable or cost-effective life. And at that time, you're going to look at replacing those systems. Unfortunately, you haven't had those big numbers pop up because the buildings are relatively new. Yeah.
Just want to make sure, Jen, are you still on? Jen? Dave?
I'm still here.
Okay, and Dave, you still on?
Yep, she's there.
Okay.
I am. So, yeah, those numbers, I mean, don't get me wrong, those numbers are big and shocking, and they always are. And it's just a matter of, you know, like you said, if you're going to add on to any building, you're going to have to provide heat and air conditioning. And then you've got to look at the most economical way to do that, and more than likely it is to upgrade the entire system for the building to do that, right? Makes sense. It just comes down to, you know, like we've always decided with our spending, it's like you just go through year to year and you figure out how much money you really have to spend, and then figure out which projects have the highest priority.
So,
Just like the middle school concrete that popped up on the list.
yeah, well,
And
it's
we
a
did
good
it. We
example.
spent $2 million, right?
Yeah.
You know,
So you're exactly
high
right.
school roof was the same way.
So I'm going to go down a little bit more subjective road here for a second and talk about enrollment to capacity. So this is the second part of what we've been doing. Now, keep in mind that, and I don't know, Mr. Peterson, what the third day enrollment has been here right now. This was showing 4416 for the 1920 year. Is that somewhere in the range? Okay. So this is the district-generated. It's good to hear. It's the brand new one. I think we just received it. So Decision Insight is taking all of this information plus all of the demographics from all the municipalities. And as you remember, we engaged them also to go to the municipalities, find out about housing starts, and figure out what was actually going to be generated in numbers of students as time went on with the different developments that are on the books. So this is being done, I believe, mostly as a trend data analysis through the district. And you basically are looking at the growth you've seen and projecting the growth out in a similar format. This is showing that the 2024-2025 year will have in the neighborhood of just shy of 5,000 students in the district. And that's if you follow the trends you currently are in. So I'm sure there's more to this discussion. I'm just presenting the big picture of this. Decision Insight is going to bring everything back to you, including the kindergarten, full-day kindergarten changes to your district, as well as all of the municipal housing starts, and we'll lay out how many students you will really see. So we're operating off the data that the district has used to this point and carrying it forward, and that's all we have until a couple of months from now, when Decision Insight comes out with their projections.
Could you remind me on that calendar, when was the decision? I know that we had to wait till the school year started, but when was that supposed to come?
I think they said that they would have the first reports in October, if I'm not mistaken.
So for the October presentation, October
We
meeting,
can
I think
confirm
it'll be part of
exactly
it?
when,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
But I think you'll see how it parlays into this. It's actually very interesting to watch how it all unfolds. So when you talk about capacity in a district, the Department of Education in 1973, when they created the PlanCon process, used a magic number for every classroom and then multiplied that times the number of classrooms. At the elementary level, they said 25 kids per classroom times X classrooms times 100% use. No district can ever do 100% use of every classroom. You have classes that are under, you have classes that are over. There's no magic elixir to get you right to that point. Further, when you develop your scheduling in middle school and high school, you need different rooms available at different times. And in a middle school, oftentimes, and we'll talk about your middle school, but oftentimes in a middle school, you're typically looking at a house structure, a team structure, something like that, where everybody starts in the core classrooms as homerooms. And high schools, you can kind of put kids everywhere. But what your district has done is they have set some limits with your school board policy that dictate room size guidelines for the most part, how many students can be taught in a classroom. So we've taken the upper range of all those and used those in these capacity analyses. I realize I'm over my 15 minutes, so I'm sorry about that.
You're okay. Keep going.
Okay. So this slide is just defining that Department of Education has a certain calculation that they've used over the years, which does not match how districts use buildings anymore. So typically at the elementary school, you'll look at sizing a building to approximately 90% of that number that you multiply times classrooms. Middle schools, you look at about 85% because you need room to move the kids around the classrooms and still have your specials available. High schools are about 80% because of all the other programs that get built into that. And so for any principal, assistant principal who has to do the scheduling for middle school and high school, just ask them how they put together a schedule and see how they try to fill those classrooms. So these are the magic numbers the architects try to use to try to give them some room to do what they have to do. So we also having met with each of your administration, we determined how you use those buildings. So in your elementary schools, the rooms that support educational programs such as art, music, gym do not receive a capacity. So you're really just looking at your traditional classrooms as the capacity. You also have a couple of IU classrooms in there that are not calculated as well. As you know, you have some intermediate units using some of your buildings. So those are spaces that if you look at it in a different way, those are rooms that might be available to you. The secondary schools, the middle school capacity, we looked at as a team model, and then the high schools, it's based on all of the rooms that support general education, plus art, plus computer apps, plus family consumer science. So you look at that building as a homeroom building. How many kids can I get in the rooms that are rooms? And then now we start circulating the kids around to make it as simple as possible. So if you do that, we have something that we call a current versus functional capacity. And we're going to talk about functional capacity for the rest of the time that we're with you. I don't mean tonight, for the rest of the time that we talk to you as a district. So we use Charlestown again. In Charlestown, you have a couple of rooms that are being used slightly differently than general classrooms. You've got the multidisciplinary classroom that has since been assigned to another school, so suddenly there's a space there. You have a bank of 3 kindergarten classrooms at the lower level that at the time that we did this, there were 2 being used, so suddenly there's an extra room there which affords you the space for your full day. And then you have a full-size gifted classroom, and as we've gone through the district and had these discussions, gifted can probably be worked with a couple other programs so that you could kind of cross-utilize a room for those folks plus somebody else. And then you have an interesting anomaly that so many other districts have, in that you're all trying to store your science kits. And so where do the science kits go? And guess what? In your district, you built science rooms, and that's where the science kits reside. So is there a better way to handle those, and does that become a useful space for some kind of academic program? So those are the things that we looked at within each building. And just as an example with Charlestown, you'll see in here, you'll go through the diagrams, things are color-coded to try to give you a sense of where the spaces fall in the building. This just happens to show the different learning spaces throughout the primary level. Then down at the ground level, we have that bank of 3 full-day kindergarten classrooms. The differentiator being the toilet room in the classroom. So you have 3 that do that. So when you do the math on this and you make some changes to go to this functional use, and we could go through this for each building, you kind of change the configuration just slightly. And just so you know, we're not recommending to any of the principals that they change how they use the building. All we're saying is, if you did a little bit of reconfiguration in that building, you could or could not get a little bit more capacity in there. And we kind of have to build the district out that way to make sure that you're maximizing your use. So as you begin to get this report laid out to you, you'll see that we had the current use of those spaces on the left-hand side, and on the right, if we apply that logic that we just talked about, you have this functional use, and it's quantities of rooms times those numbers of students in each classroom that I laid out. Example in Charlestown is grade 1, you allow 22 kids per room, grade 2, you allow 24, grade 3, 24, grade 4, on and on and on. So we're trying to do the math based on how this district really looks at the use of their classrooms. What you find out with the current analysis is that in Charlestown, in the orange spot on the right, your third day enrollment was 362 students. That building could probably accommodate 500 students if you did a couple of the things that we just talked about. The science room, the science storage, the gifted room, and so on. And so that building, remember, we want it to be 90% and below capacity in your elementaries. That building actually has some room at 72% capacity, okay? Once you get over 90 at the elementaries, we're uncomfortable, and so are your kids and your teachers. So,
Was the 502 the 90% number or the 100%
no,
number?
the 502 was actually, the 502 students is how much that building will hold if you do the minor things that we talked about.
But
there.
if you want, but you would prefer to go to 90% of that.
Excellent point. So it would be 90% of 5, right? So it'd be
Okay, so it's really not
450
500.
students.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Good clarification. So when you look across the elementaries, currently, your third day enrollment was 2,006 students. You have a capacity in the district with some of the modifications that we're offering and suggesting that you could get approximately 2,600 kids in this district. So it's worth taking a look at the elementaries. It looks like, given the current use, you're at about 76% capacity of all those spaces. There's no exact math. This is kind of a, information for you. And if you take that a little further,
And they all got to be,
I'm sorry?
is that 2,600, I'm sorry, is that 2,600 the 100% number or the 90% number?
Yeah, exactly. So 2,600 is the 100%. Thank you. So 90% of that. So the last part of this, and I'm just going to throw the middle school and high school in front of you because this is now taken out. The information that we have right now is the future enrollment based upon the district's study so far. So the district's analysis of enrollment projections in 2024, 2025 says that you'll have 2,066 students in the building. So you can see that if you use that number, you would be at 78% of capacity.
I'm sorry, you're going to think I'm hung up on this 90%. I am. Yeah. If you use 90%, then in the Charlestown example, we're fine. We're at, if 90% of that number you showed is 450.
Yes.
Same here, 90% of 2634, I'm doing this in my head, is around 2,300.
Right.
So we're already at 90%.
2,600 times 90,
Yeah,
about
10%.
it's 2,200, right?
Right, so we're already over the 90%.
No,
So-
you're under. Because the buildings can hold that 2,200.
Oh, that's what they can hold.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. We're at 2066.
Yeah, so you would be at 78% capacity at that time, and you want to stay below 90.
Today,
So can I just,
just for today. I mean, that doesn't, no growth.
can I just recap this because,
No, my point is that
go ahead,
the
Dave.
numbers are exactly for today. No, I'm sorry, but, so the number that we have today is still under, but tomorrow or next year or the following year, once we get that projection, we may see these numbers creep above that maximum amount.
You very well may, and so that's why we're really looking forward to the decision insight numbers, because they're going to tell us the whole story. So you'll see how all of these rank with those numbers, yep.
And I just want to point out that the purpose of tonight's conversation is really high level. So we're going to have multiple opportunities to explore this information and really dig deeper. So we'll have multiple opportunities to revisit this, to really wrap our head around where we are, so that when we get the numbers correlated with decision insights numbers, we will already understand the methodology, and then it will be a matter of providing that additional data on top of that. So I just don't want us to get too caught up in the numbers when now we're just trying to get the process
Right.
and the methodology.
Matter of fact, I don't want to do the next 4 slides because it will do the same thing for middle school and high school, and it's going to make you look at it a little bit too deeply, and that's what we need the next 3 months to do. You do. And remember, that does not have decision insight in it. So if you go past the middle school, and this is a big discussion for us to have about how the middle school gets used, the advocacy program versus a team structure. And then you go past the high school, the big message, as the superintendent said so clearly, right now, the elementary schools are all operating within that targeted 90%. The middle school is not. The middle school appears to be functioning at 122% of capacity, and it should be in the 85% capacity. The high school seems to have, and looks like it will continue to have, capacity in it. So you have room on either end from the looks of things. It looks like your middle school is full. It's clear it's full, and it looks like it will continue to become more full. So the high-level discussion would be, is that where we start to look at some space in the district? What is it that you do to alleviate what appears to be a potential challenge at the middle school? And there's all kinds of options for that, and that's part of what the district will begin to look at as time goes on.
I just want to share one piece of insight for whatever it is worth. These numbers and capacity percentages are based on formulas. So I don't
Yes.
want anyone leaving this meeting this evening feeling as though Dr. Souders is educating children on the pavement, because that is not happening. The building is functioning, yes, on the new pavement, but the building is functioning very well.
It is.
It is using these formulas. We don't want to continue. We need to have serious conversations about what models are we using to make sure that with the formulas, we're within a capacity that we're comfortable to allow students to move from one place to another. So we do not have an overcrowding problem. It's using these formulas, and I just want to be really clear about that. And I want to say kudos to Dr. Souders and his team, because the way they schedule, the folks within the building would not feel as though this percentage is accurately depicting their daily life. So I just want to be really clear about that.
You have seats for kids, and the administrators are able to schedule students to have great educational environments to do it. The building was designed as a teaming structure, and the teaming structure says, while the kids are in a homeroom and they're all in those primary spaces, none of the specials are being used. That's how a typical teaming structure high school is designed. You guys over time, for both educational uses and for capacity uses, have moved to an advocacy program. And the advocacy program allows you to use spaces throughout the building, and as long as the principals can move the kids around in an efficient manner, you've got capacity to do what you're needing to do. But that's not a true teaming structure in a middle school. So that's the takeaway in how the building is being used. That's the big picture, and those are the bases of what we're going to be talking about from here on out. All of these numbers will get adjusted as we start to learn about the enrollment projections, and these will all become part of regular conversations for the district. But it's a big hit right away. We showed you big numbers, and we showed you where we think some pressure points are within the district, and those are the two things to walk away with, not the specifics. I agree with Dr. Speaker Palabinski. Please don't go away with specifics. Just look at the big picture and know that as we go along, we will modify those. The first goal would be to try to get to October, and I agree with the question about Decision Insight having their information. That will give us a much firmer feel for what we have as a true capacity issue in the future. And that would be a great stage for us to start these planning workshops that we have planned for October, November, December. So that's the high level, and it took more than 15 minutes. I'm sorry.
Can I just make one semi-related comment? I've gotten the question of, did the school board sell all of Backton Hill land? And I just want to reply, no, that if a building was needed to be constructed there, we still own enough land to do so. I know it's not in here because we don't have anything built, but I just wanted to put out there that we do still own a piece of land, just so it's in the public and people are aware.
So you don't get any black marks for going over your 15 minutes. I want to tell you that I'm grateful. You did a very nice job. I understand. I think I just want to run it by. So we're going to take your literature, we're going to peruse it, but unfortunately, without decision insight numbers. It's not complete.
That's correct.
So basically, I'm going to think back and watch the meeting before our next meeting until your next piece comes up.
Great.
So if you get the decision insight information prior to our next meeting, will you redo this and send it to us so that we will be up on the right level at our next meeting?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dave, Jen, anything?
Well, I mean, we've got to, that's a wide open statement on the decision insight. We've got to make sure that it makes sense and we look at it because, years ago when we reopened Sugartown and I sat on that redistrict committee and all of those who were around and watched it, we were projected to be well over 5,000 students by now from that original projection that we did back then. So we need to make sure that those numbers that they provide us, and I know what it's all based on, that they just make a reality common sense check, because otherwise we could be spending a lot of money building a whole lot of capacity that may or may not be needed, right? That's all I'm saying. So to just ask them to plug those numbers instantly in and say, okay, here's the answer, I think we have to have some discussion around what those numbers are and what do they mean. Does that make sense?
It does.
Total sense, David. Can I ask a follow-on question? I think it's perhaps mixing metaphors here, but I think it's part and parcel to the discussion. Dr. Speaker Palbensky, you and your team meet with the local municipalities on a regular basis as well to just have dialogue about the growth in the community. How, maybe since I know folks are going to be tuning in to listen because they'll be interested in the building, refresh us all on what that relationship looks like and how might that help us play into our decision-making dialogues at this table?
Absolutely. We meet quarterly with the 4 municipalities that make up the Great Valley School District and talk about developments. One of the most recent meetings we just had last week, and the purpose of those meetings are purely information sharing. And any new developments as well as the impacts that are shared by the developers. We also have invited the Schrader Group into those meetings starting on our next quarter, because the more we can have that cross conversation, the stronger the information will be. And as Mr. Barrett said, one of the benefits of having decision insight, it's another position point to add to our own analysis. So the more feedback we can get to balance out those numbers, to find a middle of the road, most likely or most confident place to land is what we will do. The townships and municipalities have been amazing in working with us, and Mr. Peterson and I last week had a great opportunity to not only talk about developments, but to talk about roles and responsibilities within our framework. I know I've been asked multiple times if I would mention to the municipalities that we would appreciate a lack of development. And certainly that is not our role in those meetings. We are very appreciative of the information of whether developments are being considered, whether they've been approved, at what stage of development the different developments are, and that information is incredibly powerful for us. They also have invited us to join their meetings to provide educational insights, because many of their constituents are wondering what's going on in schools, especially if they don't have children in school, had children, will have children, or have no intention of having children. They're interested in learning. So that partnership has been incredibly powerful, and it's also been very informative as we're thinking about not only capacity issues, but transportation issues, et cetera, et cetera. So, thank you.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that the school cannot and should not go to these meetings and act as a zoning board member. I'm just putting it out there publicly again, because we get this question a lot, and I just want to make sure everybody knows that that's not our role.
Thank you, Mrs. Gunderson, and yes, we are certainly responsible for the education of Great Valley School District, and that's where we take that responsibility incredibly seriously. Outside of that, we're very excited about our partnership, but we certainly don't have any authority over the developments. but we're very interested in learning where we are.
I have 2 quick points. The first is that the numbers Mr. Schrader showed you this evening did have the district's enrollment projections in them, and they've proved to be fairly accurate in the past. We had a long conversation with Decision Insight last week, and we were questioning all their methodologies and how they're doing all these things. And when their numbers come to us, we're going to compare them with the district numbers and see where we're on and where we're off, and then question why. So there'll be a lot of work done the administration feels that the decision insight methodology is good before those numbers just get plugged in. The other point I wanted to make is that the exercise that the Schrader Group did along with Jim and Kenny to go around and look at every need in the entire district is going to be very useful to us, even in the buildings where we don't end up doing a project. Because now we have all those things identified, we have price tags on them, and it's going to help us with our long-term facility projections, regardless of which buildings have a construction project and which ones do not.
Can I ask a very basic question? For Decision Insights, and this is tying into Dave's question earlier, because historically I know that at one point we were concerned about enrollment and potentially having to, or considering for cost cutting to consolidate and potentially close a school. That idea was floated years ago. How far into the future do they feel confident in predictions, or is that a question for a later board meeting?
I know they're giving us a 10-year projection. And of course, the confidence level will go down each and every year beyond year 1. But it's the best job they can do to give us a 10-year projection. Did you want to add anything?
Just that I think that you also have the ability to update those annually for a couple of years, so they can help you stay up on that. But you're right, that's exactly what it is, 10 years.
The other concern too is, and they probably can't tell you the answer though, is that is some of this going to just be a surge in growth, right? So there's a lot of construction going on right now. There's a lot of people moving in. Typically, those that are moving in have younger kids. And it's the same thing years ago when Melbourne Hunt was built and why we had to reconsider opening Sugartown, right? At the time, there was initially 110, 120 kids coming out of that neighborhood into Katy Markley. And, since then, all those kids have worked their way through middle school and high school, and there's still turn that goes on in there, but there was by no means the initial surge that went on 15 years ago, right? So how much of this is going to be a surge that'll work its way through the system over the years, and how much of it's going to be, what we can count on year to year being the normal number? I don't know if they can tell us that. There might be 2 different answers on how we handle capacity.
I can't answer that this evening, but what I will tell you is that when the Decision Insight numbers are ready, we're going to be scheduling them for a board meeting. We don't expect to have them here in person, but we will have them on a conference call. They'll review their PowerPoints and so on, and then the board will have the chance to ask all those questions of how did they come up with these assumptions and so on.
That would be awesome. Anyone else?
Very small logistical question for Dr. Speaker Palabinski. So this meeting is filmed. Obviously, we all know that. People are probably watching or will watch later. The meeting on the 15th is not a regular board meeting. It's a facilities committee meeting plus. So will that be filmed, and can the public have access to that if they can't make it?
Absolutely. That will be recorded, and there will also be an opportunity. The format of that meeting, 6 to 6:30, will be held in the cafeteria. At 6:30, we will transition to the auditorium. We will have the presentation by David and his team, and followed by opportunities for any public, any staff, anyone to ask questions at that meeting. All of that will be recorded. Following November 12th and December 9th, those 2 meetings are work group meetings. So they will be publicized as far as our communication plan, and folks will be invited to attend. Due to the nature of a work group, it would not be possible or effective to record those meetings. However, information will be shared very thoroughly following each of those. There will be a spot, or is a spot, on our website that will talk about our feasibility study. So all of the information will be held in that repository, that any community members will be able to access that easily.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to do this like Dave. All right. I want to just say to Jim and Kenny and your team, it is labor intensive what you guys do in a day. I know that. When we have consultants doing things to the magnitude of this feasibility study, largely I know all the legwork lands with you. We are grateful that the two of you have not missed a beat getting all of our work done so that we could open our doors, and accommodating the Schrader Group so that they came in very well prepared tonight. So on behalf of the board, we really are very grateful for the facilities department. And Jim, if you could please give that to the rest of the team for us, we'd be grateful. And if we don't have anything else on this matter, do you have anything for us?
These gentlemen as well.
Thank you. Now we will go on to the public participation portion of our meeting. This is where any member of the public can address us for 3 minutes, less or a little bit more. Respectfully, we'd hope, would anyone like to take the microphone?
Ellen, is this portion of the meeting just about items on the voting agenda, public comment?
On the voting agenda, thank you. I'm new to this job. Any items that are on the voting agenda? Seeing none, we'll go into the consent agenda items. Okay, minutes of August 19th. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Dave?
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimous. Okay, so we have, can I lump these together, Chuck? Okay, so let's take the rest of the consent agenda items. From 8:02 and 8:03, we'll take the financial approvals in case somebody needs something pulled out. Do I have a motion? Treasurer's report and tax collection report and invoices.
Move to approve?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Dave?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous, thank you.
Even Jen said aye.
Yes, I heard her.
I did.
Okay,
Sure.
so we have financial approvals, 804 per pupil budget for 2020 through 2021. Financial approval for Cisco SmartNet annual switch license. Financial approval for the data center annual maintenance. Financial approval for the Xerox DocuShare. Financial approval for Presto software. Financial approval Relay for Google Chrome license agreement. Financial approval of School Messenger with West Interactive Services Corporation. Financial approval, Prepare Train the Trainer contract. Financial approval, approve private school agreement with Overbrook School for the Blind. Financial approval to renew of Justicorp contract for nursing services. Financial approval, addendum with SOS School Operating Services Group, Inc. Financial approval, special education settlement agreement, and an agreement regarding waiver of expulsion hearing and stipulation, and the transportation approval for the new craft driver. Do I have a motion
Move to approve?
and a second? Second. Any discussion?
I have a question on 814. I know we went over it last week, but I don't remember if we went to this one in detail. This is for SOS Services, School Operations Services Group, and it's an update to our original agreement from 2017 and lists hourly rates for multiple positions. There are substitute positions for custodians, administrative personnel, et cetera, clerical. And I just wanted to know what I see it's an update. Are those increased rates, decreased rates? What was the change? I see there's also a change in the term, but I'm most interested in just the rates to know if it went up and by what percent, and was it because this is the going rate? Just curious.
The purpose was to lock in the rate for multiple years. So that was the purpose of the addendum, to extend the rate. I do believe this included a percentage increase. That was the rate that we had agreed to, but now we're locked into this rate for 3 years.
Thank you.
The main
Thank you.
purpose also was to add positions on, there were a couple temporary positions that were needed. For example, the turnover in the administrative assistant for the enrollment. We needed the previous employee to help do some training. So whenever we add a position, even if it's a temporary one, we do an addendum to that agreement.
Can I ask a question about 8.04 per pupil budget? Can you just orient me to what that is?
That's approved annually by the board as a methodology on allocating budget dollars to each school based on student enrollment. And there's weighting factors for elementary, middle school, high school, weighting factors for gifted, special education. There's an allotment there for transportation and athletics. But it's the same methodology that's been used in the past. This year, we recommended a 1% increase over last year's allotment, and when we updated the enrollment projections.
Thank you.
I had a quick question on 813, the nursing contract. Just out of curiosity, Halloween is billed at a very high rate. The rate is $84 an hour. I realize it's only one day out of 365. But what's the justification for that day being so much higher if it's a day rate and not an evening rate?
I believe the justification is the market and the need for additional supports on that day versus others. And it's
Daytime.
primarily due to food allergies, et cetera.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
Aye.
So 9.01, information item, official Act 1 index for 2020, 2021. Chuck?
Yes.
And we don't need a,
Microphone on?
we don't need a vote on that, right?
Just informational.
Do you want it repeated? Chuck, if you could repeat it.
Yes, I
please.
apologize, I didn't have my mic on. The official release was done, and it came in at 2.6% for this coming budget year. The year we're in right now was 2.3%. And no, it is just an information item, so you don't need to vote tonight.
Okay, so that's just for informational purposes. We'll move to personnel approvals. Do I have a motion for 10.01?
Move to approve?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any dialogue? We good? All in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Unanimous. We have nothing under policy approvals to vote on. Facilities, transportation, food service approvals, there are none. PSBA officers election, and that will be me. So as the board's PSBA representative, I will make a recommendation for the slate of candidate PSBA officers. I am recommending to my colleagues, based on the determination from the PSBA of the following candidates being qualified, considered qualified. President-elect Art Levinowitz, Upper Dublin School District. Vice President David Hine, Parkland School District. Central at Large Julie Preston, Northern Tioga School District. Section 1 Advisor Sabrina Backer. Section 3 Advisor Ron Cole. Section 5 Advisor Marcia Pletta. Section 7 Advisor Tricia Steiner. The Insurance Trust Trustees, their term ends December 31st, 2023. There are 3 slots. I am recommending 2 individuals, Kathy Swope and Mark B. Miller. School Board Secretaries Forum. The Forum Steering Committee, term ends December 31st, 2021. I am recommending the following 3 incumbents for a 2-year term. Crystal Mance, Jamie Lynn Zimmerowski, Jennifer Davidson. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Amy. Any discussion? All in favor? Dave?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Dave and Jen. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you for accepting that. Okay, that brings us to the presentation by the public on any items that are not on the voting agenda. So you can come up and talk to us about anything you'd like. We'd like you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Do I see any takers? All right. Any other board comments? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Dave?
Aye.
Aye.
Jen, thank you.
Aye.
Thank you very much for
Wonderful night,
attending.
everyone.